Determining the best is a challenge, but city builders are a passion of mine for decades now, and based on my experience, these are what I deem to be the best city building games of all time. I'm being pretty strict with what counts as a city builder here, so let's find you the greatest to play right now. Laying the foundation, SimCity 4. Now, when it comes to the greatest city builders of all time, I think we all have to mention SimCity 4. But it's not just about old classics or new greatest hits. See, this list can include some older games, but they have to stand the test of time. So there's an honorable mention, of course, to the original SimCity. We wouldn't have pretty much any of the city builders we have today if SimCity didn't come along and be like, hey, this is a video game, back when people didn't think it was even a video game. But SimCity 4 was not just the pinnacle, it was the culmination of the SimCity series, and it was a bit of an end of an era. So we can of course keep in mind the origins of series or the origins of genres, but when it comes to the greatest of all time, SimCity 4 does still hold up for a number of reasons. First of all, it just continues to look great, you can get it in HD widescreen, it plays great, and not just that, mods for the game have continued to develop, and not too long ago, modders unlocked DLL modding for SimCity 4, unlocking the capabilities of things like 3D cameras and stuff, and it's still a little bit rough, but SimCity 4 is continuing to develop thanks to the community, and it's just continuing to get better as time goes on. So that's why it's still one of the greatest city builders of all time, and it's very hard for other games to surpass it because the community does keep it going. In a similar vein, development-wise, Caesar 3. Now, before modern years, I would have said of the Impressions game series, which are a classic series, which is Caesar 1, 2, 3, and then Pharaoh, Zeus, Emperor. They were all pretty good, and I would have previously said either Pharaoh or Emperor was the best one. There was some good ideas in Caesar 2, and of course Zeus is a big favorite of many, but Caesar 3, over the last 10 years, or more actually, thanks to Bianca, who created an open source engine replacement for Caesar 3. And it was all vanilla gameplay, but in a new, smoother, better performing engine, but it was open source and therefore moddable. So Caesar 3 got a project called Julius, which is an open source engine replacement for the game, and it just makes the game run better and do better. But then the community decided to develop a branch of this called Augustus. And Augustus has been in development for a few years now, adding in new map capabilities, increasing the sprite limit, new buildings, new monuments, new gameplay mechanics entirely. And Caesar 3 is just continuing to be developed and changed every single day, it seems. And every time you look back at where Augustus is, which is now past version 4, it just gets better and more developed and more refined. So yes, honorable mention to the whole Impressions series, but Caesar 3 and Augustus and Julius really does show that the community can make something the best. Even if the game wasn't necessarily the best in its day, or it's not in its best over time, the community can just rally together and keep things going. And Caesar 3 Augustus, I think, is the epitome of how a community can make something the greatest because they want to make it the greatest. Next up, we've got to mention Cities Skylines. And I want to do an honorable mention to SimCity 5 here because it sort of proved that spiritual successors can often be the true sequel. Cities Skylines wouldn't have been jumped on so quickly if SimCity 5 wasn't so rough. And I did hear SimCity 5 did pick itself back up over time, but it was basically too late. Cities Skylines was already grabbing the players, and that essentially, I think, ended the SimCity series. So Cities Skylines is the biggest city builder in the world, not just in terms of player count, but also sales and also number of DLC, most likely. And It's also got a vibrant and in-depth modding scene. So City Skylines is just incredibly complex. It's an urban city builder, which very few have taken off because City Skylines has dominated the genre for so long now. It's dominated so hard that even City Skylines 2 hasn't been able to overtake it. But that's only been a little bit of time. City Skylines 2 is still currently the second most played city builder in the world, at least according to Steam player count. And it may someday overtake the original, or will someone come along and make a successor like City Skylines did to SimCity? It's hard to see where the future will go, but it is a bit of a topic these days, seeing that spiritual successors are often the true sequels rather than the actual sequels. Because sometimes the spiritual successor is actually made by the old developers, or it's just people who are still passionate about the genre. So yeah, City Skylines continues to be the biggest city builder in the world, and its reign might be up, losing only to its sequel if City Skylines 2 continues to develop, but we will have to see what the future holds. Hey, now that you're a bit into the list, I'm sure you're enjoying it, so it'd be greatly appreciated if you can like the video. And if you want to support, use the GOG referral link below to buy any game, or become a patron on Patreon, especially if you're a city building enthusiast and want me to continue covering city builders, which I love doing. Thank you. Alright, next game. Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. This is a very, very good game that spent a long time in early access. And to be clear, the main list here are all fully released games. And I wasn't expecting to really list Workers and Resources Soviet Republic in a fully released list, but it fully released! This one spent half a decade in early access, being loved throughout. It was not a bad game in early access, but it fully released and continues to be loved. It went through some drama, with it being taken down and reinstated through some legal problems, but that was all worked out, and now Workers and Resources Soviet Republic is a mainstay of the city building genre. Not just because it's a good city builder, but also it's thematically a little bit different from everything else. It's not fantasy, it's not medieval, it's not just modern urban, it's got this twist to it, visually, and just the environment sort of sets it apart. Like, this one does put you in charge of an impoverished country, trying to deal with intricate production chains and a fully simulated global economy, and you have to take care of your citizens and control everything when resources are scarce and just everything in general is scarce. You're trying to raise your meager town into a bustling metropolis, but you don't have the best of starts. This one did fully release in 2024, so it is the most recent of games in this list that has fully released. So we can see how it develops and performs into the future, but I think it's just generally a consensus that it's a good one. To call yourself El Presidente, Tropico 6. Tropico is a long-running series. Tropico 1, 2, 3, 4, some other ones out there. You all have your favorites, I'm sure. But Tropico 6 is the most recent one that released in 2019, and it's just very popular. It's still well played today. It was very well received in general, and it is sort of the, you could say, the most graphically best looking and most developed one. Though I do know that, as with any long-running series that has many iterations of the game, you probably have your personal favorites. So the whole series is great, and Tropico 4 is a personal favorite of many. Some just like playing Tropico 1. So I'm not saying that the other Tropico games are bad, it's just Tropico 6 is sort of the most recent, most developed one. And it would be nice to see a new one in the future, but for now, Tropico 6 maintains its player base and its community, and it is generally a good game. That's why it's here. Now, Tropico, if you don't know, you are put in charge of essentially an island state, and you are this dictator trying to control your people while also making a lot of money. But you have to decide, how much money do you give to your people? How much do you keep for yourself? There's a lot of interesting and quirky twists to the gameplay, like curate speeches to try and encourage your people or just try to stop them from rioting. And it's just this very charming, very charismatic kind of game that has a lot of personality to it. It's not just a city builder on an island. It's got this sort of aesthetic of dictatorship, which you are inhabiting. And that's really what sets the Tropico series apart, and Tropico 6 pulls it off as well. Next up, Anno 1800. The Anno series is another long-running one, and I know people have their favorites. 1404 is often a personal favorite of many, but I sort of feel that 1800 is just overall a little bit better in every regard compared to 1404, though I do love 1404 as well. Now, fun fact, the Anno numbers in the titles always adds up to 9, so if you haven't noticed that before, and now you know. And in Anno 1800, it is set in the 1800s during the Industrial Revolution, which is sort of a perfect setting for the Anno series, which is about building up on islands, but also colonizing other islands, and that's really a bit of a theme of the colonial age. But Anno 1800 just visually looks amazing. The music is incredible. Like, I rewatched the trailer for this video, and I forgot how good the music was in Anno 1800. And it's just such a refined and developed city builder that so many people love, and it continues to be popular. And it did get quite a lot of DLC and expansions, but it was all sort of like good fun content, generally speaking. Now, as these are long-running series, I should mention that Anno has also announced an upcoming one. So, honorable mention to Anno 117 Pax Romana, which is the first Anno game that's going to ancient Rome. And fun fact, we haven't gotten a new ancient Roman city builder in about 15 years, and they're just sort of coming up now with a new one that just released, and also a few other upcoming ones, which may or may not be good, but for 15 years we did not get ancient Roman city builders, since the ages of Caesar IV, Grand Ages Rome, SimCity Rome. Since 2009, we haven't been getting ancient Roman city builders, so to see Anno go there is very interesting. So Anno 1800 is currently one of the greatest city builders ever, but you know, we can actually hope that Anno 1800 isn't on a list like this in the future, because we can hope Anno 117 is actually better. Will it be better? It's hard to say, but Anno 1800 is a solid choice right now, and we can see if Anno Pax Romana is gonna be an even better one. For a very popular hit, Against the Storm. This is a survival city builder with a number of twists, which sort of has the city building community divided, but its popularity is undeniable. So Against the Storm is a game where you go on these missions into these procedurally generated forest glades, and you are building your town in these openings and clearings as you chop through the forest and uncover secrets and encounters and dangers. All the while, you are trying to meet objectives which are set by your monarch, and you need to keep your boss happy while also keeping your people alive and happy. So there's a number of things here which are not just city builder, but also survival mechanics and management, planning, logistical mechanics. And this has made some of the city building community just not like the game, because it's too many different things and it's not what they're looking for, and it's just sort of either confusing or just distracting. Having said that, on Steam at the moment, it's got an overwhelmingly positive 95% rating. So people are loving Against the Storm. It is one of the biggest city builders success stories of recent years, and it's just blown up. It's just very popular. It is maintaining its player base and getting expansions, and just more stuff is on the way. These survival city builders is a subgenre of city building that has sort of spawned from Banished, right? So for a long time, the city builder genre was sort of dormant. Like, we got one or two here and there, But then Banished came along, and maybe not invented the idea of a survival city builder, but it did popularize it. And Banished blew up, and although today Banished might seem a little dated or a bit limited, Banished set the stage for the survival city builder, which, as you can see, many have followed that path and excelled in that path. And you might be thinking that, oh, well, now we have so many clones and just copycats, but I want to remind everyone that you can't have good games unless there is this very strong foundation of just people making lots of games. Like I always say, you can't have the diamond without the rough. You need to have this pressure from many, many games being developed for the best to rise to the top. If you don't have the pile of games underneath it, you don't have the top. So don't feel bad or discouraged that there are many games that are made and they don't quite make it, because they are all adding to the foundation of the ones that do. You need this competition. When we had very few city builders at all, no one was really making them, and we basically got nothing. Today we are getting more and more great city builders that are standing the test of time and catering to various different audiences, and it's because the explosion of city building development has really taken place over the last decade. So Against the Storm is one that has risen to the top, and so far it seems to be standing the test of time. Now, before we go into the final game, I want to talk about some honorable mentions which are in early access, so I can't list them as the greatest of all time because they haven't technically released yet. There is Timberborn. For full transparency, Timberborn did sponsor me in the past, but this is not sponsored. The beaver city builder calling itself Lumberpunk, and you build on this very vertical map, and you can build things on top of each other, and it's very industrious, factory management, production chain kind of stuff, as you survive in a harsh environment which has dynamic water flows, droughts, and various environmental disasters. Timberborn has had over 25,000 user reviews on Steam at overwhelmingly positive 95%, so it is just very, very popular. And then a game that started out as sort of looking like a multiplayer Banished, Kingdoms Reborn. This is a procedurally generated world map where you build your kingdom in a location and you can cooperate or compete in real time in multiplayer. And it is a survival city builder where you're building up your town and surviving in this environment. But the multiplayer aspect really does sort of add this whole other layer, and they've been adding more cultures, and it's developing quite a ways since its initial early access release in 2020. We're approaching half a decade for this one, but it's at over 90% positive on Steam, and it is going well. It's just unclear when the final release will be for this one. But they're expecting 2025, but it's still a maybe on that one. And then this next one also has sponsored me in the past, but this is not sponsored. Foundation. This is a gridless medieval city builder, and it's been in early access for over half a decade and continues to be in early access, but also at a very positive user rating. And this one does have this sort of modular monument building or modular building in general, and it's very organic. You don't build roads, roads form based on where your people are walking. And buildings can be constructed in various parts. The more parts you add, the better the building, but the more expensive it gets. And there's so many sort of phases and eras that you go through building this city, this medieval city. And it's been taking a long time to develop. Like, after a few years in early access, it was still feeling very rough, but then it kept getting updates, and it's this very slow but steady progression. And it eventually probably will be one of the greatest city builders of all time, but it's still in early access, so I can't give it that title quite yet. Then for another survival city builder, Farthest Frontier, honorable mention to this one. Also very positive user ratings on Steam and has been in early access since 2022. They did expect to release in 2024, but seems like they're missing that one. Farthest Frontier is another survival city builder, looks great, had some performance issues when I first played it. They've been working on that. Like, visually it's still amazing, and it's got very interesting crop rotation mechanics and a touch of military, environmental elements, and it's a lot here, and it is very popular, and so far looking like it's a well-made, solid game. And it's gonna be good to see this one finally fully release whenever that is. And of course, for another potential greatest of all time coming in the future, but currently in early access, is Manor Lords. This is one of the most hyped city builders of all time, I think. It released into early access in 2024 and crossed 100,000 concurrent players on Steam. And keep in mind, concurrent players doesn't mean total players. It means the number of people playing at that very second. And that's a lot. 100,000 players gets you in the top 10 games on Steam, and Manor Lords is this medieval, realistic, visually very, very impressive social and economic simulation of that era. There's seasons, there's weather changes, cities rise and fall, there's regions to conquer or do diplomacy with. You can train units and go out and kill bandits or fight against enemies in full-on warfare. It's part strategy game, part simulation game, part city builder. There's a lot to this. Though in early access, it is going relatively slowly. Some people have been wanting updates to come faster, but the developer has said that they want to go slow and get it right, which is a respectable position, but it does mean that it does take a while for the game to get those updates, and it could be a long time in early access. The initial plan is to stay in early access for around a year, which means a 2025 full release, but I'm not gonna hold my breath for a full release for Manor Lords. I think they'd want to get it right rather than stick to a deadline. But it is playable now, it is popular now, and people are enjoying it, and it might be one of the greatest city builders of all time in the future. And then, for one of the greatest city builders of all time, Frostpunk. This is a post-apocalyptic survival city builder set in a frozen wasteland where you build a central pillar of heat and build around it to try and survive the extreme environment. There's no winter season here, it's always winter, and you have to make difficult moral choices and societal decisions to try and keep your people alive, happy, and not go completely insane. So Frostpunk was just one of the biggest hits of survival city building for a long time, and it continues to be popular. It's got very positive, over 90% rating on Steam. It fully released in 2018, it did get some updates, and it still has a very strong player base that continues to play Frostpunk. Now a sequel was made, so Frostpunk 2 is a thing that you can play right now as well. But they went in a slightly different direction, less city building, more society management, and some people really enjoyed that, but others were sort of missing the city building element, so it's not quite what they're looking for. Kind of like Against the Storm, where some city building enthusiasts are really into it, but it's not quite what everyone is looking for. So Frostpunk 2 is a more recent release, and it's good, it's just not for everyone, whereas Frostpunk, the first game, seemed to have a bit more of a universal appeal, and people are continuing to play it to this day. It looks great, like visually, even though it's a frozen wasteland, it's still visually, the fidelity looks really nice, and it's got a lot of sort of interesting survival mechanics with heat, and you can explore a world map and discover things, and just generally there's a lot to do and a lot of challenges that you can face in Frostpunk that keeps it interesting. So I'm gonna add this one to our list of greatest of all time city builders. And there we go, that was a bunch of games. Which one was your favorite, and do you think any others deserve a mention? Remember, I was being very strict with my criteria of what's a city builder here, and also, it doesn't mean that other city builders I didn't mention aren't good. I kept mentioning extra bonus city builders throughout this entire list. I of course can't mention every single one, but there's so much out there, and I just wanted to give you the absolute very best top picks, creme de la creme, for you in case you were thinking that there weren't any good ones. This is of course just one list of many that I've made. Maybe the game you're looking for is already on another playlist. Check that linked on screen and down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.